last night, an interesting development occurred in college football as the first college football committee rankings came out. Now, I will reiterate for those of you that are listening to the Brains World podcast for the first time. I do not talk a ton of college football during the months of September, October, November. The reason being is because there's not a ton of big games. Really, I feel like November, December is where college football really matters. This year has been a little bit different because we know about how this draft includes all the top prospects, of course, including Penix from Washington, Marvin Harrison Jr. from Ohio State, Drake May, Caleb Williams, and many others. We know this is the best draft in decades. We know how good the Pac 12 was seemingly going to be with USC Colorado coming out early. And now here, obviously, Bo Nix from Oregon, Michael Penix from Washington taking over the pack. But I found it very interesting of how the college football committee determined the top four teams in the country. I have always said that I would like to be on the committee, and the reason being is because I do feel like that the committee just really does take into account your resume, and they don't really take into account that the Big Ten and SEC is a lot better than the Pac-12. I'm sorry, it just is. And so I really do feel like that, for example, a two-loss Alabama team is better than, a zero-loss TCU team from last year, even though TCU did upset Michigan in the semifinal. The other thing I did say is it's really hard for me to predict the semifinal games more than the national championship games because they do give you a month off for the semifinal game. And obviously, we can see rust. It gives teams more time to repair, all that good stuff. I'll find it fascinating next year. We do go to the 12 team college football playoff, which I've said obviously has its positives and negatives. The one negative I think it does have is it reduces the importance of the regular season. We've talked about big games this year, Oregon, Washington, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, Penn State, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Tennessee. Some of these games that have been happening recently, they would have less significance because right now, Alabama, who's at number 8, looking out on the college football playoff, they would easily be in. We talked about Alabama, Texas, Oklahoma earlier in the season. Those games would not have as much significant importance next year as they did this year. I do think the positive to it, though, is we'll get to see a lot better teams. We'll get to see who truly is the best teams in college football. We know that the NIL and the transfer portal have made it so much easier to get better in college football on a yearly basis. It used to take 3-4 years to sort of rebuild your program. Now, if you're good about it, especially on your side of the ball, whether you're an offensive coach or a defensive-minded coach, you can rebuild your side of the ball in a year or two. But the committee once again did a classic committee, and they took the best resume in Ohio State, who obviously good wins against Notre Dame, good win against Penn State. I just do not trust McCord at the quarterback position. I don't think Ohio State is explosive right now outside of Marvin Harrison Jr. I think they've been winning games mostly because of their defense. I don't think their offensive line is as good as it's been in years past. I think they can match up with Georgia. I think they can match up with Florida State, Oregon, Washington. I think the only team on this list they don't necessarily match up with, which for my money is the best team in the country, which the committee put at number 3, is Michigan. And maybe it's because of the sign stealing scandal and all of this, with Jim Harbaugh, which I talked about last week when I had Austin Arnold on the show. I think in Michigan was a 5-3 program or a 6-2 program. Nobody would be talking about it. For some reason, Michigan and Jim Harbaugh always have their biggest target on their back. And Ohio State fans are not going to like this because I'm obviously from the Northeast Ohio area, but I am not a Ohio State fan. I'm not a fan of one college football team. I may be the most objective and casual college football fan out there is. I just got done saying I really only watch the big games. But from what I saw this year, Michigan just rolls over people. They dominate people, and I don't care. They haven't played anybody. They're dismantling people 50-10 on a daily basis. They have the best offensive line in the country. They have the best defensive line in the country. Their quarterback who is projected to go in the late first round of the draft. He's actually playing up to his potential this year, and you see it from this Michigan team. They take the ball away. They're very explosive. They don't turn the ball over a lot. And I think Michigan, for my money, is the best team in the country. I would put Ohio State at number 2. I would have put Florida State at number 3, though. Again, I don't know how good Florida State is right now, but I don't know how good really any team is in the country. We saw Texas lose to Oklahoma. We also saw them almost lose again earlier in the season after they dismantled Alabama, who has not looked good at times this year. They don't have a great quarterback either. I think Georgia's sort of there on reputation. They haven't dominated anybody, but they're certainly obviously there with their recruiting and their stars on the defense side of the ball. You can make an argument, even though Washington almost lost last week, you can make an argument to me that this should really go Michigan, Ohio State, some combination of Washington, Oregon, Florida State, Georgia. Again, I love Georgia. They're the back-to-back national champions for a reason, but they just have not had an impressive win. Bo Nix outside of Washington and Oregon pretty much steamroll everybody. That game came down to the wire. You know, they put obviously Washington ahead of Oregon because Washington beat Oregon. You can flip them in any order. I think they're both better than Florida State and Georgia right now. But I think it's clear that Ohio State and Michigan are the two best teams in the country. The one thing that's interesting about this ranking is the fact that Ohio State at number 1, if they fall to number 4, or excuse me, number 3, Michigan at this point in the season in Ann Arbor, obviously the Saturday after Thanksgiving, Ohio State will now have breathing room. They can be that one-loss team out of the 4 to make it into the CFP. If Michigan loses against Ohio State, they're probably out of it just based on the committee rankings. I'll be fascinated to see if Ohio State is 1 and Michigan is 2 by the time that game comes around. Will that game have, much significance? Because the loser should be in, even though the winner will go on to play in the Big Ten championship game. I honestly wish that we didn't do the Big Ten championship game based off the Big Ten East versus the Big Ten West, because we all know the Big Ten West is significantly worse than the Big Ten East. Again, we know Penn State is a very good football team. They're not anywhere near, in my opinion, Ohio State or Michigan right now. So I would have loved to see Ohio State and Michigan play twice. They play that game in Michigan, then they go in a neutral field to the Big Ten championship. And if you have to do it again, you play it again in the college football playoff. I think the committee needs to understand that television ratings are what draw people to a screen. TCU last year was not going to draw people to a screen. I'm sorry, Florida State is not going to draw people to a screen. Alabama will draw more people to a screen than Florida State. I think we have the best collection of college football that we have in a long time, and we have big brands. If Texas can get back in it, if Oklahoma can get back in it, Washington, Oregon, those are big brands, or more big brands than TCU. That will draw. Florida State's an okay brand. They're not the greatest brand, in my opinion. They've taken a little bit of a hit in the last decade. Too bad the USC offensive line is terrible, or we could have seen Caleb Williams in this postseason, which I know we all wish we could have seen. But at the end of the day, again, I would have had Michigan, Ohio State, probably somewhere Oregon, Washington, then Florida State, then Georgia. But we'll see how these committee rankings turn out here as we get to the big time college football games in the next couple of weeks, especially the Saturday after Thanksgiving, first week of December, conference championship weekend. That's where the big boys are made. Like that clip from the Brand's World podcast? If so, make sure you go down there and hit that subscribe button. While you're down there hitting the subscribe button, make sure to also hit the notification bell so you never miss another upload. And make sure you check out all the other clips from the Brand's World podcast right here on YouTube.